Salam sehat dan salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Selamat datang dan selamat petang kepada peserta kuliah umum di Ambassadorial Lecture Series tahun ke-10 pada program kegiatan tahun 2021-2022. Pertama-tama, kami mengucapkan rasa syukur dan berterima kasih kepada Yang Mulia Duta Besar Jepang untuk Republik Indonesia, Bapak Kanasugi Kenji. Kepada Bapak Takahashi Yusuke dan kepada Ibu Julian, staf dari Kedutaan Besar Jepang. Kami juga mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Ibu Dr. Lea Santiar selaku Ketua Pelaksana yang dibantu oleh Ibu Dr. Ruli Pasaribu, Ibu Susi Nataliwati MSI, Ibu Nisa Natalia Sespol, Julius Esum, dan Yara Esum. Acara ini adalah acara kegiatan atas kerjasama Kedutaan Besar Jepang Jakarta dengan Pusat Studi Jepang Universitas Indonesia yang telah berlangsung setiap tahun sejak tahun 2012 sampai sekarang dalam bentuk kuliah umum. Kuliah umum tersebut diberikan oleh para ekspatriat dari Jepang dan dari Indonesia dengan judul kegiatan The Ambassadorial Lecture Series. Sejak wabah dunia pandemik COVID-19 diberlakukannya pola kerja work from home, kuliah umum kami pun tetap dilaksanakan dan berlangsung secara virtual. Kuliah umum pada awal bulan Desember tahun 2020 ditutup dengan kuliah umum yang diberikan oleh Duta Besar terdahulu, Yang Mulia Duta Besar Jepang untuk Republik Indonesia, Bapak Issey Masafumi, dengan tema Bekerja Bersama, Maju Bersama. Kali ini, Yang Mulia Bapak Duta Besar Kanasugi Kenji akan memberikan kuliah umum dengan tema Japan and Indonesia Relationships as Strategic Partners. Beliau akan paparkan bagaimana hubungan Jepang-Indonesia sebagai mitra strategis. Upaya apa saja yang penting dilakukan atau disepakati dalam menjalin mitra kerjasama dan kolaborasi. Untuk menghemat waktu, mari kita dengarkan bersama-sama paparan dari pembicara kita, Yang Mulia Duta Besar Kanasugi Kenji. Terima kasih, selamat mengikuti acara kuliah umum. Yoroshimasu onegai itashimasu.
Baik, terima kasih kepada Ibu Dr. Diah Madubranti sebagai Chief of Center for Japanese Studies Universitas Indonesia atas kata sambutannya. Berikutnya saya akan masuk kepada acara perkenalan pembicara kita yang terhormat hari ini, His Excellency Mr. Kanasugi Kenji, Ambassador of Japan to the Republic of Indonesia. Saya akan bacakan sedikit mengenai Duta Besar. Bapak Kanasugi Kenji adalah Duta Besar Jepang di Indonesia. Tiba di Jakarta pada tahun lalu pada bulan Januari 2021 dan langsung menyerahkan surat kepercayaannya kepada Presiden Jokowi pada sebulan setelahnya. Sebelum menduduki posisinya pada saat ini, beliau bekerja pada posisi kunci Kementerian Luar Negeri Jepang, termasuk sebagai Wakil Menteri Senior, Direktur Jenderal Urusan Asia dan Oseania, dan Direktur Jenderal Urusan Ekonomi. Penugasannya di luar negeri meliputi Republik Korea, Amerika Serikat, dan Malaysia. Beliau bergabung dengan Kementerian Luar Negeri pada tahun 1983 setelah lulus dari Hitotsubashi University, Tokyo. Demikianlah perkenalan singkat mengenai Yang Mulia Duta Besar Jepang, Mr. Kanasugi Kenji. Tanpa berpanjang waktu, I welcome His Excellency Mr. Kanasugi Kenji to deliver the lectures. Sir, the time is yours. Dozo yoroshiku onegai shimasu.
Well, thank you very much for your kind introduction, about me. And I'm very honored to be able to appear in this lecture series as at one of the most prestigious universities in Indonesia. Today's topic is Japan-Indonesia relationship as strategic partners. But before going into the topic, let me do a little bit more self-introduction. I joined the Foreign Ministry in 1983, and I've been public service since then, close to 40 years. And my overseas assignment, as was said in the introduction, covered South Korea, United States, Malaysia, and also Australia. After joining the Foreign Service, I was sent to Australia as a diplomatic trainee and also a secretary at the embassy in Canberra. So this is my fifth overseas assignment in Jakarta, but my first time to be ambassador. Also, my area of responsibility back in the headquarters, basically economic negotiations. I attended many economic negotiations with the United States, particularly, and also I was in charge of Asia and Oceania. So I was responsible for Japan's relationship with China, South Korea, even though we don't have diplomatic relationship, but North Korean affairs, all these neighboring relationship. And I'm very delighted to be here as ambassador, since Japan and Indonesia have been enjoying very close and cooperative relationship since we established the diplomatic relationship in 1958. So that said, allow me to go into the topic of discussion today. Can you put up the sort of a PowerPoint presentation material on the screen? Yes, thank you. Could you go to the next page? Yes, first of all, I would like to touch upon some socio-economic fundamentals of our relationship. There are commonalities and complementarities between our two countries. Commonalities, this is my personal opinion, but when we talk about strategic partnership, I think there are three important elements to share. One is sharing fundamental values, and second, strategic objectives, and third, actions. In terms of fundamental values, Japan and Indonesia are two of the largest democracies in the world, and we share many values, democracy, market economy, human rights, and so forth. Also, we share strategic objectives. We'd like to make this region free, peaceful, and prosperous. In that vein, from geopolitical aspect, we have a lot of similarities. And also, in addition to that, we are both archipelagic nations located in the Indo-Pacific. In terms of actions, we are together trying to promote healthy multilateralism and also tries to secure a maritime cooperation and upholding democracies and so forth. But sometimes actions could be different, even though we share fundamental values and strategic objectives. For example, in the case of North Korea, Indonesia has diplomatic relationship with North Korea. Japan does not, but ultimately both Japan and Indonesia would like to make North Korea more aligned with the rest of the world, open up their country, open up their economy, so that North Korea can be a prosperous democracy in the future. But in the case of Indonesia, as you have diplomatic relationship, and you put more emphasis on dialogue with North Korea, engagement. In the case of Japan, of course, we try to engage with North Korea, but because of North Korea's nuclear missile developments, we place more emphasis on pressure or deterrence vis-a-vis North Korea. Only today, North Korea launched another cruise missiles off the coast of Japan. So we are really often threatened by North Korea's missile and nuclear activities. So as they are just examples. Even though we share fundamental values and strategic objectives, we sometimes take different actions in order to achieve the same strategic objectives. But as you can see, there are many commonalities between Japan and Indonesia. Could you go to the second page, next page? Yes, complementarities. Japan, as you can imagine, rapidly aging country with a smaller number of children and inevitably shrinking population. We lose 1 million of our population in every 2 years, and the mean age of our population is 46 years old. We need more talented workers. We need market overseas, and we need export base and production bases overseas. In the Indonesian case, very big country, very energetic, ambitious, younger population. Your population is increasing by 3 million or more every year, and mean age of Indonesia is 29 years old. So Indonesia has a lot of potential with increasing and young population. So in that sense, we have a lot of complementarities. So ultimately, we can say that our relationship is very much equal footing and mutually beneficial right now and into the future. Could you go to the next page? Now, I would like to refer to priorities of Japan's foreign policy before I go into Japan-Indonesia relationship as such. What is diplomacy is all about? Diplomacy is to maintain and promote peace and prosperity of the country and its own people. It's very much a self-centered concept. Diplomacy is all about. But that used to be the concept in the 17th, 18th century. But the world now is very much intertwined. So no single country can achieve this diplomatic objectives on its own. So we need to cooperate with like-minded countries, and we need to cooperate with the entire world to try to cope with what we call global agendas, common agendas. And in the case of Japan, immediate region is what we now call Indo-Pacific region. We try to uphold peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region, and we are ready to work with many partners in the region to achieve that objectives. Region of interest used to be, we described it as Asia, but as we see increasing free flow of people, money, and goods because of the technological advancement, since 1980s, we were talking about Asia Pacific. Particularly since late 1980s, we focused on Asia Pacific, so as in the case of Indonesia. One of the reasons why we do so is Australia in 1989 hosted the first round of APEC ministerial meeting, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting. And that still goes on and creating a very big potential for both Japan and Indonesia. So that's Asia Pacific concept started in late 1980s. But now Japan focuses on Indo-Pacific as the region of interest. Again, because of the technological advancement, we can encompass wider areas as we see increasing flow of people, money, and goods in the Indo-Pacific region as one region. And in the region, what we try to achieve is to realize and strengthen a free and open international economic system from which Japan benefited a lot in the past 45, 50 years. As I said, Japan is a rapidly aging society with shrinking population. And ultimately, we don't have much natural resources. So we need to import a lot of natural resources and manufacture various products in Japan based on these natural resources and exports them to the world. And in order to reap economic benefit, we wanted to see the world free and open in terms of economic system. Please go to the next page. Yes, allow me to be more specific about what we are trying to achieve and the priorities of Japan's foreign policy. Number one, achieving free and open Indo-Pacific. We call it FOIP, F-O-I-P. Again, we used to focus on Asia, but Asia Pacific then went on to Indo-Pacific. And we would like to achieve economic growth in the entire region encompassing Pacific and Indian Oceans. And also, the important thing is that we would like to reinforce the rule-based order in the region. Rule-based means that countries are treated equally, bigger, small, or more powerful or less. They are supposed to be equal, and the guiding principles of our relationship needs to be rule-based order. And also,
ya bandingin jangan sama ya koma aja.
Hello. Hello. Yes. Free and open.
5 giga. 25 giga.
Free and open Indo-Pacific FOIP is very much an open and inclusive concept, not excluding anyone and not intending to create new institutions or compete with the existing institutions. And this idea of free and open Indo-Pacific was very much supported by countries like United States, Australia, India, Pacific Island countries, and even by Mongolia. Mongolia is very much a landlocked country, but they are very much supportive of this idea of free and open Indo-Pacific. And also in the case of ASEAN, Indonesia took the leadership role in coming up with the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. And there are a lot of synergy and commonalities, complementarities between our concept of free and open Indo-Pacific and ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. And between Japan and ASEAN, we identified a couple of areas where we could concentrate on our efforts to deepen up our cooperation. One is maritime cooperation, connectivities, and sustainable development goals, and overall economic cooperation. Could you go to the next page? And also, priorities of Japan's foreign policy is enhancing good relationship with neighbors. United States is our alliance partner. US is the only alliance partner for Japan. China, the biggest trading partner, and we call our relationship with China as a mutually beneficial relationship based on common strategic interests, meaning that we try to manage difficult bilateral issues with China while we make cooperation on our common agenda items. Climate change, environmental issues, how to address North Korean issues. All these are included in our cooperative agenda items between Japan and China. Yes, ASEAN is one of the most important partners for Japan. Particularly Indonesia is the biggest country in ASEAN. 40% of the population, 40% of the GDP, Indonesia shares in the ASEAN, entire ASEAN. And now we have a mechanism called Quad, quadrilateral cooperation, Japan, United States, Australia, and India. But this is nothing to do with the military alliance or institutional building. It's very much a loose gathering of like-minded countries, and wherever our interests converge, we try to set common targets and tries to make concrete cooperation on these common agendas. Number 3 of our priority is international rulemaking. As I said, countries needs to be treated equally, and based on that equality, it will be created by common rules. So particularly, we try to promote a high standard economic partnership like RCEP, in which Indonesia played a very important leading role, and also TPP 11, that is a Trans-Pacific Partnership, short form for Trans-Pacific Partnership. And originally, the United States was a member of this TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. But when President Trump came into the power, he opted out from TPP, and now 11 countries are members of this TPP 11. Now, China, South Korea, United Kingdom, and Taiwan tries to be member of this TPP 11. That can create a very big and maybe one of the biggest trading areas if we could realize having these partners, economies on board with us. And also in the international rulemaking at international organizations such as WTO, World Trade Organization, and APEC is an important rulemaking body. Even though APEC is not an international organization as such, but the TPP I refers to was a creation of APEC process, and also G20. Again, G20 is not really a rulemaking body, but the discussions and the basic guidelines created in G20 would be taken up in the United Nations and become international rules. And Indonesia is chairing a G20 process this year. So we very much looking forward to cooperating with Indonesia in the G20 process this year. Next page. And also, Japan's priority agenda items in our foreign policy is global issues, how we can address common agenda items of the world. Under the current circumstances, fighting against the pandemic is very important, so as sustainable development goals. And also, disaster risk reduction is very much a common agenda between Japan and Indonesia. And finally, realizing a human-centered society that respects human security is our priority. Human security, that is the opposite concept of hard security. Hard security tends to focus on physical safety and security of people and countries. But in the case of human security, we put more emphasis on welfare of the people. So if you look at the elements underlined down there, education, health, environment, human rights, women's empowerment, all the important items of cooperation in the area of human security. Next page, please. So I think our priority is very much similar to the priority of Indonesian government in terms of what we try to achieve through our diplomacy. So Japan and Indonesia have been acting together to achieve peaceful, prosperous Indo-Pacific and hopefully beyond. And there are a couple of things we try to do together. Particularly, as I mentioned, there are a lot of commonalities and synergy between Japanese version of a free and open Indo-Pacific and ASEAN outlook of Indo-Pacific. It is particularly so, we are archipelagic nations, Indonesia, Japan are archipelagic nations, and maritime security is one of the important areas. And also, we'd like to promote and uphold democracies in this part of the world. And Myanmar is a very big challenge for both Japan and Indonesia. Next page, please. So what comes next? Top priorities for our future cooperation. I just wrote down 6 areas of cooperation. From number 1 to number 3 were more or less related to the development of Indonesia, and the number 4 to number 6 are cooperation items between our 2 countries. In the case of Indonesia, infrastructure development remains very important, so as human resource development, and also more balanced economic development throughout Indonesia. Particularly outside Java is a priority of Indonesian government. In terms of cooperation between our 2 countries, maritime security, political and security, and common agenda, all these items are very important part of our cooperation. Next page, please. Now, allow me to see overall picture of Japan-Indonesia relationship and looking into the future. This is the broad picture of our economic cooperation. In the side of private sectors, there are about 2,000 Japanese companies operating in Indonesia, and these companies originally put emphasis on Indonesia as a big market, population of 270 million people expanding. That's a very big market for Japanese companies. But as they come to invest in Indonesia, Japanese companies now tries to make Indonesia as one of the important production bases, as well as export hubs in the region. They put emphasis on investment, employment, human resource development, and export. In terms of investment, Japan is the second largest investor in terms of foreign direct investment, only after Singapore. But in the case of Singapore, many companies, not only Japanese, but companies abroad as well as Indonesian companies have headquarters in Indonesia. So from statistics, Singapore tends to be ranked #1 and Japan #2. But as a matter of reality, I think Japan has been one of the largest investors in Indonesia. And in terms of employment, we Japanese companies created 7.2 million jobs in Indonesia. And overall, 90% of the Japanese companies operating in Indonesia are conducting some sort of human resource training program. And over 50,000 participants are there in management training in the Japanese companies, meaning that Japanese companies are not operated by Japanese expatriates. Rather, Indonesian nationals are taking over the leadership role in many Japanese companies. In terms of economic values, Japanese companies are contributing to 8.5% of the total GDP of Indonesia, and also about a quarter, 24.4% of export attributable to the Japanese companies here. And also in terms of infrastructure, power plant, where Japanese companies are somehow related, create 17 gigawatt electricity. That's about 26% of the total electricity demand in Indonesia. So Japanese companies over the last 60 plus years contributed a lot to the development of Indonesian economy. Next page, please. This is official development assistance, Japanese government contribution to Indonesia. Accumulated base ODA is over 50 billion US dollars. And what we tries to say is 3 T's and 2 W's, top quality, trustworthy, transparent, and creating win-win relationship. And if you look at the diagram, Japanese official development assistance account for about 1/3 of the total official development assistance Indonesia received in the year between 2009 and 2019. Next page, please. In terms of infrastructure project, Japan put the emphasis on connectivities and export of Indonesia. For example, Palembang Port, it's a new port being developed by Indonesia and Japan near Jakarta. It was soft opened in 2020.
Sorry. Lupa
And Palembang Port car terminal was opened late last year, and export of cars, vehicles produced in Indonesia started to be exported from December last year. That would be a good, important export base for Indonesia. And it is particularly so because up until now, all the car makers operating in Indonesia, when they try to export their product overseas, they need to bring all the product through a very congested metropolitan Jakarta to bring them to Tanjung Priok Port. That create more traffic congestions in Jakarta. But if Palembang Port is fully developed and fully operational, no needs to go through traffic congested to Jakarta to Tanjung Priok port, I just go to Palembang for export. Also, Jakarta Mass Rapid Transit, MRT, that's a subway. Many of you may have ridden MRT in Jakarta. We completed only 1/4, a quarter of the entire project, but still already this MRT started to change the lifestyle and landscape of Jakarta. What we are trying to achieve between Indonesia and Japan, I try to create a situation where people rely more on public transportation rather than vehicles or motorcycles. If all the public transportation, including MRT, LRT, are connected and interconnected, people can commute from their houses to central Jakarta or any other areas of the greater Jakarta areas by public transportation. And of course, that will lead to cleaner air in Jakarta. Also, Java Northern Line upgrading, that's a connection between Jakarta and Surabaya. Currently, it takes about 11 hours to travel by train between Jakarta and Surabaya. But after upgrading this train service, the duration of time could be shortened to 5 hours, 30 minutes. And also, number 5, outer islands development. Yes, as I referred to the balanced development of Indonesia, throughout Indonesia, we try to focus on outer islands development. Please go to the next page. Can you go to the next page? Yeah, thank you. This may be a little bit too small, but what I'd like to focus on is that we identified 6 islands on the western side, Sabang, and eastern side, Biak. We mean between Japan and Indonesia, identified 6 islands for fish market development. And Biak was completed, and opening of the fish market and port facility was done on October last year. And other areas, we are trying to accelerate our cooperation with Indonesia in terms of fishing port and port facility development. Please go to the next page. Yes, this is quality of life improvement. Left-hand side is what we call SABO, Build Back Better. Both Japan and Indonesia are very prone to natural disasters. So in order to prevent natural disasters, Japan built SABO dam. SABO means dams to prevent mudslides. And these dams are very effective to prevent mudslides after heavy rain. And also, I didn't write it down, but whenever natural disasters hit both Japan and Indonesia, we have cooperated with each other. In the case of a big earthquake off the coast of Aceh, and also a big earthquake in Japan, in northern part of Japan, 11 years ago, we cooperated very closely. We sent our rescue teams. We contributed in-kind and financial assistance to help the disaster-affected people. And also right-hand side is a maternal health book. This may be familiar to some of you, but this is a very standard handbook for mothers provided by municipal government. And in that health book, mothers can keep records of health situation of their children even before preborn stage, so that children can be brought up in a healthy state. And this maternal health book was adopted by more than 80% of the local municipalities in Indonesia. And now Indonesia tries to export this concept to overseas, such as Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Timor-Leste, and others. And also only recently, well, in fact, only today, I attended the opening ceremony of a facility where Japanese companies are contributing to the waste management of Indonesia. It's in the area of Bandung. As Indonesian economy develops and population grows, Indonesia needs to take care of how they deal with waste. Waste management is a bigger headache, particularly industrial waste, including waste coming out from hospitals and medical facilities. And the Japanese companies built incinerator so that they can deal with these industrial waste in a very safe environment. So these contributions made by Japanese companies, Japanese government in the area of improving quality life. I just wanted to draw your attention to these different aspects of Japan-Indonesia cooperation. Next page, please. Yes, going beyond economic cooperation, we are now trying to enhance political and security cooperation. March last year, we had a so-called 2+2 meeting. That is a foreign and defense ministers meeting between our two countries. And Indonesia is the only country among ASEAN nations with which Japan has ministerial level 2+2 meetings. And in the last round of meeting, we came up with a couple of important agreements. One is transfer of defense equipment and technologies from Japan to Indonesia and vice versa, and deepening our cooperation in maritime surveillance and law enforcement. I think as two of the biggest democracies in the world and two important players in the region, I think Japan and Indonesia needs to deepen and widen our cooperation in the area of political and security. Please go to the next page. And common agendas. Both Japan and Indonesia needs to contribute to deal with how we can resolve international common agenda items. Just take an example of climate change and carbon neutrality. In the case of Japan, we try to achieve carbon neutral by 2050 or earlier, and Indonesia 2060 or earlier. Again, between our two countries, there are similarities when we talk about the carbon neutralities. Both Japan and Indonesia are very much dependent on fossil fuel base, that is coal, gas, and oil. In the case of Japan, 80% of our electricity is from fossil fuel, and in the case of Indonesia, 90%. And also, since we are archipelagic nations, it's very difficult for our countries to connect our power grid with overseas. Underground power grid is not as effective or cost efficient as we would hope for. So we need to be, in a way, self-sufficient in terms of electricity. So what's important in order to achieve carbon neutrality at the target year? Smooth, effective, and efficient energy transition is becoming all the more important for Japan and Indonesia. We need to find the solutions in this important areas of common agenda. Of course, one way of doing it is enhancing renewable energy. In the case of Japan, we put emphasis on offshore wind generator. In the case of Indonesia, solar power is important, as we have certain geographical difficulties. In Indonesia, you don't have much wind, so wind power is not good enough to generate enough electricity. In the case of Japan, land is not as big as Indonesia, or not as flat as Indonesia. So we cannot really rely on solar power. So, but these differences setting aside, I think renewable energy is important. And also how we can do away with coal. Coal power generator is a very important topic. But for now, I think we need to make the best use of existing assets, including coal-fired power plant, so-called co-firing with biomass, ammonia, hydrogen could make a coal-fired plant more efficient and fuel effective. And also CCUS technology, that is a carbon dioxide capture, utilization, and storage. We need to have disruptive innovation in terms of CCUS, but we really have to focus on the new technologies, and also nuclear, whether we are going to rely on nuclear as energy source in the future is require a lot of discussions in each country. Please go to the next page. Yes, as this is a lecture mainly for students who are interested in Japan, I just would like to refer to student exchange and other soft topics of Japan-Indonesia relationship. In the case of Indonesia, Indonesian student, in terms of government sponsorship student, its Indonesian students consist of the largest number, and also throughout Indonesia, more than 750,000 people, students, are learning Japanese language. That's the second largest in the world, only after mainland China. Go to the next page. The number of students studying in Japan, Indonesia ranked number 6. China is the biggest country of student origin. But I think if we consider the population of Indonesia, there is a lot of potential for Indonesian students to go to Japan for study in the future. Unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the border of Japan has been closed for now. But as soon as we bring COVID-19 pandemic under control, we would like to open our border so that we can welcome Indonesian students to Japan. Next page, please. In order to help Indonesian students to study Japanese language, we send Nihongo partners to Indonesia and other Asian countries. Nihongo means Japanese language, and the Nihongo partners are those volunteers who are sent to schools in Asia so that they can help and support local Japanese language classes. And in the case of Indonesia, since it started in 2014, 744 Nihongo partners were sent to Indonesia. And all around the world, we sent 1,600. So about 50% of the all Nihongo partners are sent to Indonesia to help Indonesian students learn Japanese language. And next page, please. And the Nihongo partners are sent throughout Indonesia, not only Jakarta alone, but this year, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the area are very much restrained in Java Island. But again, once we bring the COVID-19 pandemic under control, Nihongo partners will come back to Indonesia and throughout Indonesia. Next page, please. Yes, sister-city relationship. As you can see from the map, we have 7 sister-city relationship between Japan and Indonesia. Of course, Jakarta and the metropolitan Tokyo, Yogyakarta and Kyoto are primary sister city relationship. But if you look at the deepening friendly relationship between the two countries, 7 sister city relationship is too small. So I think we need to enhance our region-to-region cooperation and friendship into the future. Next page, please. So this is what I wanted to focus upon today in my lecture. But looking ahead, as I alluded to, Indonesia is presiding over G20 process, and many world leaders, including Prime Minister of Japan, is coming to Indonesia to attend the G20 summit. And also next year, 2023, Indonesia is the chair country of ASEAN, and Japan ASEAN are celebrating 50th anniversary of our friendship. So 2 years in a row, very important years for Japan-Indonesia relationship. And as an ambassador of Japan to Indonesia, I'd like to make the best use of these 2 years to further promote and enhance our bilateral cooperation and our cooperation on global agenda items. So that's all I wanted to say today. And thank you very much for your attention. And I'm happy to take questions during the rest of my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. It was a very inspiring lecture, sir. And I would like to proceed to the Q&A session. All the participants may ask questions by typing the question in Bahasa Indonesia or in English in the Zoom chat room, and we will read them for you for His Excellency to answer the question. Please write your name and affiliation, and we would appreciate for a short and focused question. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the lecture, sir. There was the topic about the foreign students. I suppose it is very difficult for Japan government to open the country I think so. My students are also now waiting to be sent to Japan for exchange students. So every year, the University of Indonesia, especially Japanese studies, send students to Japan, and we are waiting, looking forward to sending again the students to Japan.
Yes, thank you very much for your comment. I think it's very unfortunate that we had to close our border to prevent the spread of COVID-19 pandemic, and particularly this Omicron variant seems to be very contagious. And toward the end of last year, daily cases of COVID-19 in Japan was about between 100 to 200. But now daily cases exceeding 50,000. So within a very short span of time, it is exploding. And thank God, Omicron variant, even though it's very contagious, but the symptom is not as severe as other variant, particularly Delta variant. So the rate of hospitalization is not as high as the case of Delta variant, but 50,000 new cases every day is putting heavy burden on our hospital system. But we really hope that we can overcome and bring this COVID-19 pandemic under control at the earliest possible timing, so that we can welcome foreign students to Japan. As I said, not only foreign students, but foreign workers could not come into Japan, not to mention tourists. Foreign workers are indispensable part of our economic activities as our population is shrinking. And also, in the long run, inbound tourist is very important for Japan, particularly local economies. In the year 2019, before the pandemic, we received 32 million foreign tourists to Japan, and that became zero since start of the COVID-19 pandemic. So you can imagine what sort of negative economic impact was have been brought about by COVID-19 pandemic. So hopefully we can overcome this pandemic at the earliest possible timing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the discussion. I have a question here. I will read the question for you. It is, or you can also see in the chat room. It is from Mr. Oku Nobuyuki. It's in Bahasa Indonesia, so I will just translate it easily. Oku Sensei is asking, one of the Indonesian problem is the small amount of reading interest. Indonesian people has low reading interest, and what do you think about this? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for your comment. I think it's not really a problem for Indonesia alone. I think it's a common challenge for the world. People are relying on more on computers and mobile phones and those digital gadgets, and the people started not to read too many books. That applies to my daughters as well. So, but I think reading books is very important to absorb new knowledge, new know-hows, and way of life. So allow me to encourage students listening to this lecture please read more books. And also, reading books can bring you a new lifetime experience. So yes, it's not applicable to Indonesia alone, but it's a global problems. So what we can do is just to encourage students or young people to read more books.
Thank you very much. Yes, maybe in all households, we can see our children just holding their smartphones and reading short sentences, not reading a book. So yes, I agree that maybe this is not just Indonesians' problem, but yes, we have this problem. Thank you very much. I have another question from Ibu Susi. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your lecture. I want to ask about new capital city for Indonesia. What is your opinion about new capital city? And are there any cooperation with Japan regarding the new capital city? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. New capital city is a very big challenge for Indonesia. But I do understand the reasons why Indonesian government would like to build new capital cities. Maybe overcrowded Jakarta, and in order to improve the living situation of Jakarta, having a new capital city is a good idea. And I think there is a lot of room for cooperation, not only Japan, but overseas partners, to build this new capital city as efficient and so-called smart city as possible. But the challenge is that how to acquire revenue to build a new capital city, number one. And also, it takes very long period of time. For example, if you look at neighboring countries like Myanmar, Naypyidaw was named as new capital city more than 10 years ago, I think. But still, many functions remain in Yangon. And many foreign missions, embassies, ambassadors' residence are all still remaining in Yangon. Excuse me. And also in the case of Malaysia, if I'm not mistaken, Malaysia tries to shift the capital city to Putrajaya. That is about a 1 hour drive from KL. But again, many functions remain in KL. So building a new capital city takes a lot of time and energy. So Indonesian government needs to be very consistent, and incoming new president, not only President Jokowi, but his successor and his successor needs to be very consistent to build new capital cities. And as I said, I repeat, Japanese government, Japanese private companies are here to extend our cooperation as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the answer. I have another question from Hasanuddin University. I'm sorry, I couldn't read the name here. Thank you very much for the very useful lecture, sir. I am Ayu from the Department of Japanese, Hasanuddin University, Makassar. I would like to know more regarding sister cities. Could you explain more what kind of program that sister city is? What would both cities have from this partnership, and how the cities can become sister cities? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for the question. Sister city relationship is an important vehicle to promote people-to-people exchanges. And usually, sister city relationship is based on synergy and commonalities between the two cities. In the case of Jakarta and Tokyo, both are capital cities of our countries. and also Yogyakarta and Kyoto, old traditional cities of our two countries. So we need to identify commonalities and synergies between two cities on the side of Japan and on the side of Indonesia to promote sister city relationship. And I think in the case of Japan, Indonesia, in the past, lack of interest in sister city relationship is one of the primary reasons why we only have 7 sister city relationship. And also because of this COVID-19 pandemic for the last 2 years, I think local government engagement with local governments of other countries is really diminishing. So again, once we can bring the COVID-19 pandemic under control, we would like to enhance sister city relationship between our two countries. I think Indonesia is such a big country. Many municipal governments are there here, so as in Japan. So I think there is a lot of potential to have a sister city relationship and partnership between our two countries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to proceed to the following question. There is a question from Sehan Sang from Unicom from Bandung, I guess. Good morning. Good afternoon maybe. I was wondering if it's about Indonesia-Japanese relationship. That means both country is helping each other. But I don't understand what is Indonesia doing to help Japan country, just like Japan company that built Sabo or them to help Indonesia. So the question is, what do Indonesia do to help Japan? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think country-to-country relationship is mutual, and it has to be win-win. Otherwise, relationship cannot be long-lasting. In the case of Japan, yes, because of our investment in Indonesia, we reaped economic benefit back to Japan, and that create further investment from Japan to Indonesia. So that we are creating a kind of virtuous cycle of investment, economic activities here, and bring back economic benefits to Japan, and that will come back to in the form of investment into Indonesia. And also, as I said, Japan is a rapidly aging, shrinking population, so we value foreign workers. And in the case of Indonesia, you are kind enough to send many nurses and care workers in Japan, and also many workers like acting as a fisherman, construction workers. They are helping Japanese economies sustaining itself right now. But in return, these trained workers, after coming back to Indonesia, they contribute to the nation building of this country. So again, this is a kind of win-win situation. And unless we have a win-win relationship, our relationship, as I said, cannot be sustainable. So we'd like to enhance this kind of a win-win, equal footing cooperation between our two countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the explanation, sir. I have another question from Universitas Indonesia from, good afternoon, Mr. Kanasugi. Thank you for today's public lecture. I, Katarina Kishida Putri from the University of Indonesia would like to ask a question. Japan has several principles of Japan's foreign policies, one of which is about women's empowerment. Can you explain the implementation of this goal in the program between Japan and Indonesia? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. Unfortunately, Indonesia is doing better than Japan in terms of women's empowerment. We try our best to empower women, and result is gradually coming up. But in terms of the executives in private companies or members of parliament, ministers in the cabinet, for example, we still have very limited number of women. And in the case of Indonesia, if you look at the cabinet members, there are quite a number of female women in the important members of the cabinet. And you had President Megawati in the past. In the case of Japan, we never had the female prime ministers in our history. It's a little bit difficult for me to explain why we cannot really be successful in empowering women. Maybe a social system is created as such that women tend to think that they're supposed to be at home and raising children, but their norm is changing gradually. So hopefully that we could be more successful in women's empowerment in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I have another question, sir. I will read the question. I am Santi from ASJI. On one occasion, Presiden Jokowi once said that because Presiden Jokowi refused to sign natural resources supply chain agreement to a number of countries at the G20 meeting. So the result that a number of G20 countries canceling signing the agreement. As we know, Japan depended on the natural resources need of our country. Will President Jokowi's attitude affect the impact of Indonesia and Japan in the future? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think the thinking of Indonesian government is that instead of exporting raw and natural resources overseas, they would like to have more sort of industrial base or downstream industries here in Indonesia, and that's very much understandable. So a lot of countries are now cooperating with Indonesia in terms of mining, building factories, creating industrial bases here in Indonesia, instead of merely importing raw and natural resources from Indonesia. So I think, again, under the very changing international economic environment, we need to create a new kind of equilibrium so that we can create a win-win relationship. In the past, since 1970s, for example, instead of exporting cars from Japan to Indonesia, many Japanese auto industries decides to come here and build factories and manufacture cars here in Indonesia. Some of the cars are tailor-made for Indonesian market. Toyota's Kijang, for example, is designed and built by Indonesian designers and Indonesian experts to cater for Indonesian market. So I think whatever the government policy may be, we need to adapt to this changing environment so that ultimately we can create win-win economic relationship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have another question. I'm sorry, it is from Effie Arbay. Ambassador, is the fisheries facilities development which built by Japan in Biak became one of Japanese compensation to Indonesia for Pacific War Japanese Soldier Bone Repatriation Corporation? That's the question. Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much for your question. Yes, after World War II, Japan extended wartime compensation to Indonesia, and that was the start of our economic cooperation to Indonesia. But since we normalized our relationship back in 1985, our emphasis is more on economic development of Indonesia rather than wartime compensation. That's why, as I said in my lecture, Japan is one of the biggest contributors in terms of official development assistance, and many infrastructure projects were done by Japanese government as well as Japanese private sectors. And also Japanese companies came here to make Indonesia as one of the production hubs as well as export bases. And again, tries to contribute to the nation building of Indonesia. So yes, official development assistance started in the form of wartime compensation, but now it went beyond the compensation, but tries to help Indonesia develop itself and becoming an important economic partner of Japan. So fish market, port facility building in Biak and other 5 areas is done in the way that we'd like to help or contribute to the nation building of Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, there is one more question, I think, about the sister cities corporation. What about Papua region? The sister cities, building sister cities, and especially in Papua region.
Yes, I think if you look at the original sister city relationship map, Papua has a sister city relationship with Yamagata since 1994. Sorry, I don't really know why they formed the sister city relationship. But again, as I said, there has to be some kind of synergy or commonalities between the sister city relationship. So I don't know why they created sister city relationship between Papua and Yamagata. But yes, the fact is that they have sister city relationship between Papua and Yamagata since 1994.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you very much. Yes. Okay, I will look for a moment, scrolling the Zoom. Okay. Okay, about Ho Iku Eng, I see here there is another question. It might be very a practical question, but I am wondering, Japan and Indonesia have such as partnership on child development. You have mentioned before about maternal health checkbook, but is there any other program from Japan-Indonesia partnership regarding child development? For example, build Ho Iku Eng in each city in Indonesia in the near future.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. I think we have a scheme, a part of our official development assistance, to help existing schools to upgrade itself. For example, introduction of computers or new materials to schools so that the school can be more efficiently run by the teachers. So I think maternal handbook is one area for children, but Japan has been trying to contribute to upgrading schools in Indonesia in the form of official development assistance in the past. And usually our development assistance is based on the request from the Indonesian side. When we receive a request from Indonesia, we relay the request to the headquarters, and whatever we can in the most efficient way, we'll select out of the list of requests from Indonesia. So yes, school upgrading, school facilities upgrading is one of the areas we put emphasis on in terms of official development assistance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let me see. I have one question from, okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Kanasugi. Thank you for your lecture today. I am Dian Resti Kurniawati from STBA Jia Bekasi. I would like to ask you some questions. What is your point of view about the Ministry of Education and Culture's program on a prototype curriculum that will be implemented in a limited and gradual manner in Indonesia? What kind of education curriculum system that applies in Japan? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know whether I understand the question correctly or not, but I think in the area of education, I think a lot to learn from each other. For example, as far as I understand, Indonesian system is trying to nurture critical thinking among students. Critical thinking is very important for students to think about what the real nature of things, so that they can find the solutions to problems they have at the moment or into the future. And in the case of Japan, I think so far our education system put emphasis on a kind of one-type-fit-all education. Teachers give lessons, and students are supposed to listen to the lecture, and students are supposed to reproduce what the teacher said in the course of examination. So I think in the past it was good, but the world is very complicated, and there is no easy solution for anything. So I think nurturing critical thinking among students is very, very important. And I think, as I said at the outset, both Japan and Indonesia can learn from each other in terms of how best we can educate the student at school. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the answer. Yes, we are in the university, so education is most of our concern here. How to create interesting and a fun lecture, mostly in the pandemic era like now. Everybody is online, and yes, it is very making headache. Okay, so I have another question here. I will try to translate from Steady Wardoyo. Thank you very much for the inspiring lecture. Very thankful. I would like to ask, what are the most problematic problem in arranging this cooperation between and relationship between Indonesia and Japan up to now, and what is the challenge in the future, most challenging in building this relationship and cooperation? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the question again. I think both Japan, Indonesia, taken for granted the very friendly and cooperative relationship in the past. Of course, Indonesia is a very important partner, and hopefully Japan is an important partner for Indonesia as well. But so many difficult challenges ahead. As I referred to in my presentation, smooth and efficient energy transition is very important for our two countries, and a lot of room for cooperation between us. But that said, it's not easy. In the case of Japan, as I said, we put emphasis on offshore wind power, and we developed nuclear technologies. But because of the big earthquake hit in Japan 11 years ago, a lot of nuclear facilities in Japan had to be suspended. And how we deal with nuclear is a big controversy in Japan. Whereas in the case of Indonesia, Indonesia is trying to explore the possibility of nuclear reactor, as Indonesia is aiming to achieve carbon neutral by 2060. So a lot of room for cooperation, but very much a new area, and we'd like to take stock. We should not take for granted our past cooperative relationship, but we need to create, once again, win-win cooperation between our two countries in the new challenges ahead. For example, take example of automobile. Indonesian government is trying to promote electric vehicles. Yes, Japanese automakers are trying to shift to EV, but very gradually, and not in line with the speed Indonesian government is anticipating. But if you look at the market condition here, not many EV chargers available, and traffic is very congested. So if you run out of electricity on the highway, for example, that creates further problems. So one of the solutions Japanese automakers are presenting is they are going to manufacture hybrid vehicles here. Hybrid vehicles is a combination of EV and combustion engines. It's very useful, cost efficient, but not 100% EV yet. So it's slightly contrary to the request of Indonesian government. Indonesian government would like to see kind of a frog leap from combustion engine to EV, whereas Japanese automakers' answer to the Indonesian government request is coming up with hybrid technology as a kind of bridging technology connecting combustion engine to EV. So again, auto industry is a very important industry for Japan as well as Indonesia, and a lot of ground for cooperation. But under the changing circumstances, we need to establish a new win-win cooperative relationship in any field, in any new challenges ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir. I maybe have another question here. This is regarding about EPA. Thank you for your interesting lecture, His Excellency Mr. Kanasugi. I would like to hear your opinion about Indonesian nurse that sent to Japan to be a caregiver for Japanese elderly. What can we do to improve this EPA economic partnership agreement between Japan and Indonesia? Thank you.
Yes, many Indonesian nurses and care workers are working in Japan, and they're helping Japanese nationals back in Japan. Particularly in the case of nurses, they are trained and certified in Japan, but when they come back to Indonesia, for example, they are not certified in Indonesia as nurses, because we have a different system of certification for nurses. So even though these Indonesian nurses trained in Japan are very well trained and qualified in the Japanese standard, but cannot practice as nurses in Indonesia. So, but if we can somehow change the situation so that Indonesian nurses trained and qualified in Japan can practice in Indonesia as nurses, that's another way of human resource development in Indonesia. So this is just one example, but I think Japan-Indonesia EPA created a new sort of ground for cooperation, not only bilaterally, but in a multiple stage. For example, after Japan concluded EPA with Indonesia, we concluded the Japan-ASEAN EPA, and then that created the basis for RCEP, region-wide closer economic partnership. So I think, of course, we need to improve Japan-Indonesia EPA. We need to tackle the existing problems, but we should be mindful that the Japan-Indonesia EPA created a new environment where we can have multilateral trade negotiation, trade agreements, and that led to Japan RCEP. RCEP is a very important trade agreement encompassing ASEAN 10 countries, Japan, China, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and originally India was an important member of the negotiations, but at the end of the day, they opted out from the negotiation. But still, RCEP is a very important trade agreement, and both Japan and Indonesia contributed a lot to create that region-wide EPA. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe I have a last question, maybe. Yes, I would just read it. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I have this question. This is from a student. Thank you very much for the lecture, Mr. Kanasugi. If I may ask, is there any plans from the Japanese government to boost the popularity of Japan's pop culture in Indonesia to compete with, in reference such as the Korean wave that is currently booming in Indonesia? This is from Madesang from University of Indonesia. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much for your comment and the question. Yes, in the old days, Doraemon was very popular. So was Oshin, maybe. My generation knows about Oshin. But more recently, Korean pop culture, Korean dramas became very popular. But I think we should welcome healthy competition. I used to serve in Korea, Seoul, and in the case of Korean entertainment industry, they aim for global market. And once they're successful in the global market, they will come back to the domestic market. But in the case of Japan, our population is maybe big enough for the Japanese entertainment industry to survive based on the domestic market. 120 million people. So Japanese way of thinking is if we are successful in the domestic market, we go for international market. But the Korean thinking is the other way around. So that's created a difficult situation for the Japanese entertainment industries. But again, I think healthy competition is important for the prosperity of the entertainment industries. And I hope that the Japanese entertainment industry will think about the future possibilities, including here in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe the last question, I think, Mr. Kanasuge, I want to ask about new trend of metaverse business environment. How about Japan regarding to this metaverse world?
Thank you for your question. But I'm belonging to an older generation, and I don't really know up-to-date information about the metaverse. But again, my answer is that when you look at around the world is clearly shifting to the metaverse world, and I need to learn a lot. So as many of my Japanese colleagues, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer, sir. How about the time? I think, yes, now is 15:18. Maybe I would like to ask my personal question and very just a common question. You have been in Indonesia, maybe Jakarta mainly, for 1 year. So if there is no pandemic, so you can freely go anywhere, what would you like to do in your spare time in Indonesia?
Well, yes. It's true that I'm more or less constrained to be here in Jakarta because of the pandemic. But since September last year, after Indonesia overcame second wave of COVID-19 pandemic, I had an opportunity to travel regions in Indonesia. Like I visited East Java, Central Java, Yogyakarta, Solo, Bali, North Sumatra, and very diverse culture, interesting food. So since Indonesia is such a diverse country, I'd like to enjoy every part of Indonesia, every part of Indonesian cuisine. I like eating food, so maybe I'd like to visit important parts of Indonesia so that I can enjoy myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I heard some long time ago, Indonesia is like a small kokusai teki na kuni. So it's like you go overseas just being in Indonesia. How do you think about that? Do you feel going abroad in Indonesia?
Yes, if you go to different provinces, sometimes you feel you are visiting different country in terms of food, in terms of how they dress, how they make living in the area. So very interesting and informative country for me.
Yes, thank you very much. Nice to hear that you enjoy this diversity of Indonesia. Okay, so back to the lecture. I would like to thank you very much for your inspiring lecture, sir. And I believe that a lot of questions has been asked, but because of the time limit, I think we have to end the Q&A session. Thank you very much. Baiklah, sangat disayangkan karena waktu sudah mendekati akhir dari sesi kita. Kami akan mengakhiri sesi tanya jawab. Baiklah, sebelum mengakhiri, saya akan mempersilahkan Ibu Diah untuk menyerahkan sertifikat penghargaan kepada Bapak Duta Besar. Before closing this session, I would like to ask Ibu Dr. Diah Madubranti, as the Chief of Center for Japanese Studies, University of Indonesia, to virtually present a certificate to honor His Excellency Mr. Kanasugi Kenji as our honorable speaker today. Participants may express feelings with hand claps or heart mark on Zoom. So, thank you very much for today's lecture. Ibu Diah, maybe hitokoto dozo. Yeah, the mic is still off. Ibu Diah. Masih mute, Ibu Diah. Ibu Diah masih mute. Ibu Diah tidak bisa unmute. Belum di unmute, ini di pinggir yang merah-merah. Nah, sudah, Ibu Diah sudah barusan bisa di unmute. Mungkin bisa dibantu. Yeah, we sometimes have technical problems, sir.
Nah.
Okay.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
I'm very sorry for the accident. Yes, I'm the one of your favorite culinary. I always read your Instagram and I always give you mark and comment for your Instagram. Okay, Mr. Ambassador, this certificate of appreciation is awarded to His Excellency Kanasugi Kenji as a speaker in the Ambassadorial Lectures 10 2021-2022 Japan Indonesia relationship as strategic partner. Tuesday, January 25, 2022 via Zoom, Center for Japanese Studies, University of Indonesia. Diah Madubranti. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your giving me this opportunity to speak in front of such distinguished students and audiences. I should have said at the outset, today what I said is more or less my personal view and not necessarily the view of the Japanese government, but I very much enjoyed your questions. and question and answer session was very productive and very informative to me. So I'm looking forward to having another occasion in the near future. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I will proceed. Before we forget, tolong isi kuesioner sebagai tanda hadir. Sertifikat akan dikirimkan dalam waktu 1 minggu ke depan. Reminding for questionnaire and the certificate for the participant. Finally, I will give a closing remarks for the lecture for today as follows. Facing a lot of changes throughout the world, we are looking forward to a stronger and closer relation between Indonesia and Japan, most of all strengthen cooperation, especially through this difficult time and after the pandemic comes to its end as well. Thank you to all participants. We will have another public lecture next month in February. Please come and join again. Good day, goodbye. Stay safe and healthy. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
どうもお疲れ様でした。
はい、ありがとうございました。ありがとうございました。
どうも。
YouTube sudah mati. Apakah YouTube sudah mati?
Ini kenapa ya tadi bisa mute unmute begitu ya?
YouTube sudah mati belum? Sudah, YouTube sudah mati. Mungkin lagunya mau ditayangkan lagi.